Welcome to Liberty Action Alert with Greg Seltz, sponsored by our friends at the Lutheran Center for Religious Liberty here in Washington, D.C. A program that cuts through the chaos and confusion in the culture today by talking to kingdom citizenship, bold biblical principles for a robust public Christian life. And now your host, Dr. Greg Seltz.
Good day, Washington, D.C., and friends of the program all around the country. I'm Greg Seltz. Welcome to Liberty Action Alert, where every week we try to cut through the noise and take on the issues, especially the public issues that matter to you, people of faith. We try to rely on the wisdom of the Word of God for the sake of the culture and the mission of the church, or as we like to say here at the LCRL, we're trying to put our temporal liberties to work for the sake of the eternal liberties of God for all. But today, we're not talking so much about defending the church in the public square. Today, we're talking about how the church can be a servant in the public square. So with us is Dr. Paul Devantier, and he's been on our program before. You heard us talking about the KFUO case and religious liberty in the past. And as I said, he's been the voice of, by the way, a devotional minute. He's been on the radio all the way back since 1974. I think that's what you told me last time, Paul. So you'll recognize him when you hear his voice. Welcome, Paul.
Well, thank you, Dr. Seltz. Wonderful to be with you.
Paul and his family, his wife and his family, they've been involved in the foster care programs of our country, or not, I shouldn't say that. They've been involved in the lives of foster kids. That's the better way to say it, for a long time. And he started to get involved in some of the politics of this. But I wanted him to tell the story of why they decided to do this. Maybe we should even challenge our churches. Why don't we get involved in this? Because fighting for religious liberty is also fighting for the opportunity to do public ministry for the sake of our community. In fact, there are some states that have healthy church-state relations that allow the church to actually be foster care churches in a way that allows them to be Christians even as they serve. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. Paul, just give us a little bit of that background about how you got involved with all that.
Well, thanks. I actually began life as a child. And,
Good.
And I suspect that's the case for many others as well. But I was blessed, and I pray you were too, with a wonderful childhood, and married a beautiful young woman who shared my belief that children were gifts from God and we should do everything we can to make their lives as wonderful as ours had been. And it wasn't a single decision to pursue that kind of thing. It was kind of a process. And it began with something as simple as a newspaper article. We lived in St. Louis at the time. A local newspaper article calling for individuals to consider becoming visiting foster parents for children who were in an institution in St. Louis. And my wife said, we could do that. We don't have any children of our own yet. And so we did, and that's how it all began. We had children visit us on the weekends, and one of those, who was 7 years old when he came to live with us, the institution finally said, could he just live with you rather than living at the institution, and he can still go to school here, but maybe he could live with you. So that's how it started. When he was 10 years old, he became part of our family through adoption. A month before our first biological child came into the family. So we had two children the same year, 10 years apart in age. And that began infant foster care for the most part. Okay. From the time a child was born until he or she was adopted or returned to a natural mother or parents. And for more than 20 years in our family, there was never a time we did not have at least one infant in the house, and sometimes several. And our children, as they grew, became very involved in foster care as well. They were probably better equipped to be parents when they became parents than I was when I became their father, because they lived with infants. But it became a way of life, and we loved it. We thought it was perfectly normal to do that sort of thing.
That personal way of life became a public way of life. So where did it lead?
That led ultimately to a call I received one day from the National Council for Adoption in Washington, D.C., asking if I would consider becoming the national director of a new program that was just being put into place. And you can imagine how surprising that sort of thing can be. I didn't know about the program, didn't apply for anything. I knew something about Washington, D.C., because I had been involved there for quite a number of years in the KFUO case that you've already referenced. But to make the move and live in the Washington, D.C. area, I wasn't sure. But it seemed like an adventure I simply couldn't pass up. And with my wife's blessing and the blessing of our children at the time, we made the move. The history of the program is that in the late 1990s, Congress passed legislation creating the Infant Adoption Awareness Training Program. And that program would be carried out by the not-for-profit the government chose to run the program, and that was the National Council for Adoption. So the NCFA would be responsible for the program. And after accepting the offer in 2001, I began traveling regularly to D.C. until such time as the family could move out there. Mm-hmm. And it turned out to be a wonderful experience for a variety of reasons, including the number of people with whom we had the opportunity to work who felt very strongly about caring for children, making foster care the best possible mechanism for caring for young children who were misplaced, displaced, and giving women with unintended pregnancies an opportunity to consider adoption.
Paul, let me just jump in. It's amazing to me that adoption isn't considered one of the first options when you have a pregnancy that you weren't expecting. It would be great to have another option for life.
It seems that, the two most popular options at the time, and it may still be true, the two most popular are terminating the pregnancy or parenting the child. Mm-hmm. And the legislation, passed in the Clinton administration was designed really to help alleviate some of the problems experienced in foster care, the small number of individuals willing to do foster care, the abuse that many young children, including infants, experienced because natural parents were not necessarily well equipped to care for them, and the sheer number of children in foster care available for adoption.
Paul, tell us specifically about the program, what it was designed to do.
So the program was really designed to train pregnancy counselors in all 50 states to at least be more aware of adoption as a possibility for the individuals facing the question, and training them in such a way that they knew as much about the adoption option as possible and could offer that to those whom they counseled.
Well, and you and I were talking about this, and I was very excited about your history with this, because as soon as you were sharing this with me, I was like, we just had a meeting in Washington where the state of Kentucky, the governor at the time, as well as several church leaders were coming in and were talking about foster care. They were talking about adoption and how the church and the state had worked out a healthy relationship where the churches could rise to the occasion, not just individuals, but even churches could rise to the occasion of really being a part of a solution to kids in foster care, to the need for adoption and all these kinds of things. It was a beautiful thing. And so it was one of those things that when I left, I thought, this is one of those public things the church could get involved with, because it's an extension of our view of marriage. It's an extension of our view of wanting to help those who are truly in need, and children without families are truly in need. And here you showed how easily we can kind of move into that just by saying, well, why not us? So, I mean, that to me was an exciting part of our conversation, because it just seems so natural that you were doing this. In fact, didn't you tell me the story about how you were coming home after a late day and your wife was running to choir practice? And what did she say about where there might be a baby coming soon or something?
Yeah, she was leaving from the front door as I was coming in the front door. And she simply said, if someone drops a baby off, take it. And so, yeah,
go ahead.
I knew exactly what she was saying, because whenever a foster child left, either returned to his or her mother in most cases, or to be adopted, there was always another one waiting for foster care. So, it was not unusual in our household to have someone drop a baby off. We were accustomed to that sort of thing.
Yeah, and go ahead.
Well, you referenced, something that I think is extremely important, and that's the support that can be available within, for example, a congregation or among friends who have similar respect for the little ones and a strong desire to care for them in the best possible way. The members of our congregation at the time, during all those years when we were foster parents, always asked about the little ones. How are they doing? Who's this one? Mm-hmm. Because they changed frequently, and never complained too much that we always sat in the back pew. In fact, when we left that congregation, we thought it might have been nice if they had named that pew after us, because we spent so much time there. And even our children, particularly at church, the boys in the family would always want to hold the baby at the end of the service, because all the young girls would come to see the baby. And that was a good deal for them. But
that was a good deal. Well, see, and the need is so great. And again, when it comes down to it, the strength of our nation is ultimately going to be in the strength of our families. And obviously there's a war going on politically with traditional family and these kinds of things. We're not going to get into all that today, but I also want to take this in terms of the politics of this, and then we'll come back to what the church can do, is the politics of what I call exclusion today. And where politics is being used to weaponize exclusion of people like yourself. And I said this before we even came on the program today, that I think today you would not have been able to get the directorship because of your views on marriage, your views on abortion. They would have excluded you from that. Now, that's saying one thing, but it's even worse than that. If a Christian ministry or a Christian church wants to get involved in this and they do everything the same as everybody else, they can be excluded for those same reasons today too. And so there's literally this secularism that is now weaponizing politics to say the church cannot be in these kind of things. And this is already so in Kentucky, where I was just telling you about how they've worked this wonderful partnership out, and they're really serving underserved communities and kids who have been in foster care for so long. And there was a case now, the Sunrise case, where there are these activists who are coming and saying, but if you believe in marriage, or if you believe in abortion, or any of those, or against abortion, those kind of things, you cannot be part of this program. And there was a case in Philadelphia called the Fulton case, where they tried to shut down the Catholic services just because they believed in traditional marriage, even though the Catholic Services Agency had been there over 100 and some years, caring for kids, caring for people. And I think this politics of exclusion is something I wish our people understood. We're not the ones politicizing things. We're trying to take politics out of this so people like yourself or churches that believe the way you believe about these things can have an opportunity to serve. And I think that's what's something where, again, I know you didn't have to deal with that maybe as much back in the 90s. We actually had the Defense of Marriage Act passed back then that actually defended at least the church's right to be the church.
Yes.
So again, isn't it interesting today that the politics have changed where people who are as passionate as you might not be able to serve? I think that's a tragedy.
Well, I commend you for what you're doing, and I pray that you and others like you can make sure that we're not excluded in the future from doing those things that we believe we can do extremely well.
Right. And can be such a blessing, right?
Yeah. With 500,000 children in foster care at any given time, there are quite a few of those available for adoption. But whether they are or not, if you got congregations, groups of individuals who share similar beliefs, really involved in caring for the little ones and even considering adoption, that would be a wonderful thing. And you're dealing with people you don't have to instruct on what it takes to be a kind, loving, caring individual when it comes to those around them, including the children.
Yeah.
They already have the inclination. They've probably demonstrated it in a variety of ways. If we could just get them a little bit more involved in all the children who need what they can give, but if they're excluded because they have certain beliefs consistent with their Christian faith, for example, if they're excluded, we've lost a valuable asset that could be used for so much good.
No, we've lost, not only that, I think we've lost our way as a people. And that's something, now that's more than the politics discussion can do. Obviously, we've got to try to persuade at that level. But I'll give you an example I met Tony Dungy at the March for Life. And Tony Dungy, I did not know this, but he has 3 biological children, but they have 8 adopted children. So he has 11 kids in the home. And Tony Dungy's football player extraordinaire, was a great coach. He coached the Tampa Bay Buccaneers when we were down there, then went to Indianapolis and finally, won the Super Bowl. He was just a phenomenal coach, a man of integrity, man of virtue. But as soon as he stood up at the March for Life, and he's demonstrated in his life that he's a person for life, and he will sacrifice and bring children into his home if that's what's needed. He puts his money where his mouth is, as they say. And yet he's been vilified recently just because he demonstrated, he spoke at the March for Life. And that's the kind of thing we're seeing today, where this politics of exclusion. This is a phenomenal family, phenomenal guy, phenomenal person. He's been excellent in everything he's done. And yet somehow that disqualifies. Okay, well, we're fighting, folks. Lutheran Center for Religious Liberty is fighting that battle to say you can't treat the church as a secondary institution, and you got to allow us to have the same access to these opportunities. Now, let's close with this thought. Shouldn't the church say, hey, wait a minute, not only is education in our purview, but since we're a pro-family church, why don't we get involved in more of this, the foster care needs of kids and families all around us? What do you have any advice for a church that might decide not just to do it personally, like people individually, but maybe as a church? Because a church is going to have to also realize that if several people get involved in foster care, that's going to change the dynamics of the churches and Sunday school and things like that too. What do you think?
Well, I think that's a great idea, and we should keep praying that more people consider that possibility. In the Infant Adoption Awareness Training Program, we had 180 some trainers around the country who conducted the training sessions, and many of them came from agencies affiliated with Christian churches or organizations. And they weren't selected for that alone, but
Right.
what you suggest is that today they may be excluded because of their affiliation with churches that don't agree with everything that the government seems to be promoting these days.
Well, the
But-
government will allow an agency that believes in abortion. They'll get the money. Who doesn't believe in the uniqueness of traditional marriage between a man and a woman, they'll get the money. But if you believe in those things, you won't. And that the Trinity case where we're advocating for money for our playground, for our preschool, same kind of thing. They try to exclude us merely because we're Christian. And hopefully we're getting to the point where we're saying, okay, if you give it to that group, fine, but then give it to us and let's see who serves better. Let's see who really makes a difference in the community. I don't have a problem with that. But again, there's this exclusionary thing is, well, but we're going to make sure that you die on the vine because you don't have the resources to compete with us. And that's the kind of stuff. And the school says, by the way, don't even get me going on parental choice, because the same kind of thing with the schools. We've given all of our resources over to one system. And when they decide to secularize, when they decide to actually teach our kids incredibly amoral or immoral things about relationships, we can't do anything about it because they already have our cash. Well, I say decentralize it. Let the parents take the money wherever they want to go. And you'll see a lot of these silly things go by the wayside very quickly. But when they own the process, and that's they're trying to do the same thing here. So churches rise to the occasion because it's a great opportunity. Paul, just close with a thought about how much it blessed you to be a part of the adoption program, but also just the foster care work that you and your wife did for so many years.
Well, I mean, it was a blessing for our entire family, and certainly helped to realize anew how valuable God's creations are and how much we can do to help them be well cared for, loved, and pointed, Lord willing, in the right direction for their lives. And there are so many people, many who are listening to you on a regular basis and maybe listening today, who are those kinds of people. And my prayer is that somehow, as you suggest, we can find a way. Let's get together and do what we can to make sure that we are included in the future when it comes to decisions related to the best possible care for foster children and provide additional opportunities for those children who are available for adoption. God blesses us in a variety of ways, and sometimes in very simple ways that we may not even recognize. But it's the youngster in your congregation, the youngster in your neighborhood, the youngster you see on television that needs you. And there's a way for you to become involved, and pray that you will consider that and join with others so that together we can make a difference for the future.
Well, Paul, it's been a pleasure to talk to you about this. Thanks for setting the bar so high for those who have dealt with a lot of these issues, the religious liberty issues, but then I see the service issues and the, just being willing to be the servant that God has allowed you to be. Thanks for giving us something to shoot for. And we hope that we can participate in carrying on the kind of legacy that you've demonstrated in all these arenas. So thanks again for being on the program.
Well, blessings to you, Dr. Seltz, and we'll stay in touch.
I look forward to it. Have a great day. Thanks for tuning in today. To get to know our LCRLDC work better, check out our website at lcrlfreedom.org. Contained there are resources to empower your public square dynamic discipleship. Or check out our weekly Word from the Center opinion piece every Friday at facebook.com/LCRL Freedom. Till next time, God bless you always. I'm Greg Seltz. Have a great week.
You've been listening to Liberty Action Alert with Greg Seltz. Executive Director of the Lutheran Center for Religious Liberty in Washington, D.C. This program has been brought to you by the Lutheran Center for Religious Liberty.